Hello.
Hello.
It's such an honor for me that you agreed for this interview, and I was very much anticipating it today, to be honest. So, please tell to the viewers, why did you arrive to Ukraine? Why did you take a risk at all during the war times? And why the second time? What's your mission in Ukraine?
So we are an organisation which is developing palliative care, particularly in South and East Europe. And we started to work with a palliative care team in Ivano-Frankivsk when the war broke out. And we knew them because they'd been to our Romanian hospice for training. And we started in a very small way, just trying to respond to needs like giving them an ambulance and a generator. But then we felt there was an opportunity to do more, to help with training and help provide services for people who mostly at the end of life and need what we call palliative care, which is really good care, both controlling the pain and symptoms that people may have if they have a serious illness, or the emotional, spiritual, psychological part of what's involved when you have a severe illness. So we wanted to try and develop this kind of care more in Ukraine. We also felt that we needed to have a presence in the capital, in Kyiv, so this is my first visit here. And we found a small team called SVOI, who have been operating for some time now, and they are actually offering mobile palliative care. And we're now alongside them trying to help them develop that service. We were able to rent a building where we had the opening yesterday, and that building will be a clinic so that patients can come for advice and support, and the mobile team will have a base from which to work. So small beginnings, hopefully it will grow and reach a lot more people who need palliative care in Ukraine.
It was a pleasure and an honor to see in the opening of this tiny but very important clinic yesterday with the fund SVOI, to see a British ambassador. Why British ambassador was kind enough to come and be there?
Well, I met Ambassador Harris when he was ambassador to Romania, where we started our work in Eastern Europe. And he was an ambassador that went far above and beyond what normally ambassadors will do for NGOs. He really took an interest in what we were doing. He helped us open some doors in the health ministry in Romania. And so he was very much alongside us throughout his 4 years in Romania. And then I think during that time we'd become friends. We then stayed in touch, and then one day he called me and said, I'm coming to Tunbridge Wells, which is my hometown in England. Shall we have afternoon tea together? He was attending a conference, and so I went to meet him, and during that conversation he said, this is not official, so please keep it quiet, but my next post will be Ukraine. And I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't think of anybody better to be British ambassador to Ukraine. He speaks Ukrainian, he's been here in a previous position, and for us, because he's so supportive of palliative care, I knew that he would do everything he could to help us with our mission. So that's why he came to open the centre yesterday.
Why Eastern Europe?
It's quite a long story, but I started my hospice journey in the UK. My father was diagnosed with cancer back in 1979, and it was a shock. He was only 56 years old, and he'd never been ill before, but we knew that something was wrong, and he was diagnosed with a tumour on the kidney. And then, unfortunately, by the time they discovered what the problem was, the cancer had spread to the spine, and so he became paralysed. And I was the one who, did most of the care at home for him. He had a terrible amount of pain, and at that time we didn't think there was anything more to do. We had the family doctor who visited, but apart from that, nothing. And then things really broke down. He was in a very bad way, and somebody told me about hospice. And I'd never heard of it before, but I called the hospice in London, St Christopher's.
And how old were you by that time?
I was in my 20s, so I was 27, yeah, and it was quite a new task for me, caring for someone with so much pain. But he came to the hospice. I don't think he knew whether it was day or night when he arrived. I went in the ambulance with him. And when the doors opened of the ambulance, a nurse stepped in and said, "Hello, Mr. Perolls, hello, Graham." And I thought, how do you know my name? And just one of the little details of hospice is that, taking an interest in who's coming in the ambulance, who's the family. And I felt safe from that minute on. And just in a few days, his pain was relieved by the proper use of drugs. And within a week, he was able to come home again, and the quality of his life after that was totally different. He lived for another 6 months after that with a much better quality of life. And in the last week, he went back to the hospice and he died in the hospice, and it was a very peaceful death. So it inspired me, and I realised that all the pain he had was really unnecessary. And so I decided I wanted to start a hospice in my hometown, which I did in 1984. But the connection with Eastern Europe was a funny one, because I went to Romania as a tourist in 1975. I made friends there. And
that's such an interesting choice for a tourism. Why, hiking mountains, something like that?
Not really. I mean, basically in those days before computers, I had a Swedish friend. We went into a travel agency we decided to go away for a week's holiday, and we were thinking maybe Spain, maybe Portugal, a nice warm place. The lady in the travel agency couldn't find something that fitted our budget, and she just said, "How about a week in Transylvania?" Mm-hmm. It sounded like an adventure, so we signed up for it. And when we arrived in Romania, the bus that was waiting for us, it had the Dracula tour written on it. And basically it took us to all the places in Romania associated with Dracula. But it was when I got lost, we got lost one day in the city of Brasov, and a young man came up and said, "Can I help you?" He said he'd show us back to the hotel, but he said, "Please come and visit me. I just got married. I'd like you to meet my wife." So they became my first friends in Romania. It was a bit surreal. It was in, the days of the dictator Ceausescu. So when we walked into his small apartment, he had to turn the television on very loud so the neighbours couldn't hear an English accent. And it was very fascinating for me. It was like travelling back 100 years going to Romania. But that journey led me to go back several times in the communist time. And then I took my family back. By that time I got married, and we had, I think by then, 3 children. And we went to stay in the ski resort in Poiana Brasov for New Year. It was 1989, and that was just before the revolution started in Eastern Europe. And it was a very hard experience, seeing people queuing for bread at 4 o'clock in the morning, not much food, no heat in the homes. And so when communism fell in December of that year and Ceausescu was got rid of, I went back a few days after to see if my friends were okay, because a lot of people in Brasov had been shot. And it was on that visit that my friend took me to the cancer hospital in Brasov, and I saw a young man dying in pain. And by that time I'd had the experience of setting up the hospice, and I felt that was maybe the way that I could help in Romania to introduce the hospice concept, because it wasn't known, and people who were terminally ill were just sent home to die, and they had absolutely no care whatsoever.
You said something which really struck me. You said, "I decided to start the hospice in my hometown," but you are not a doctor. So how this thing montage one with each other in Britain?
Well, I grew up in the motor trade, so it was something very different. My grandfather had started a Ford garage, and so I grew up with the business. But I felt that after my father died and the business was up and running again, in the way that I felt I wanted to do it, I had the time on my hands, so I felt that I could give time to starting a hospice. So I researched a lot. I talked to people who'd started hospices in England, and they guided me. And so I went to see the chief nurse in our district. I found a doctor who'd had a little bit of experience in palliative care, and he said he would help me. So really the hospice started in the front room of our house. We gathered together a few people who were interested to do it, and that's how it began.
Was it initially a mobile care, or was it just inside, like, hospital care?
So I didn't know anything about mobile care at the time because my father had gone to the hospice and they didn't have a mobile team in our area. So I wrote to Cicely Saunders after my father died, actually, said I was very interested in starting a hospice. She said to me, well, you've just been through a bereavement. I'd advise you to wait a year before you do anything. And then, of course, I got the business up and running and I almost forgot about it. And then my mother died 4 years later, very suddenly. And her death was totally the opposite to my father's. In a hospital, they had no idea about how to care for a dying person or how to talk to the relatives. And that was really what pushed me to think, now I'm going to start the hospice. And Cicely, this time I didn't tell her, but she had advised me not to start with a building, to start with a mobile team. So that's then why we started with a home care service, and the hospice came later.
Mm-hmm. So how does it look like now, after all these years? How it looks in Britain now? Is it a mobile, several teams? Is it one city, many cities covered?
The hospice movement in the UK has spread all over the country. Mm-hmm. I think virtually every main town has a hospice. If not a hospice, a mobile team. I think there are about 250 hospices in Britain now, physical units. And even in hospitals, sometimes they have a palliative care team that advises when a patient comes into hospital. So the hospice movement in England is very, very widespread now and very, very well known. And almost all hospices are run by charities. They're not part of the state, but the state contributes usually about between 30 and 50% of the funds. The rest of the funds are raised in the local communities, and all sorts of ways, concerts and events. We have charity shops that we sell donated goods, and we apply for grants from foundations. So the bulk of the money is actually raised through charitable means.
And when you started the first home service, what did your friends and family told you? What was their attitude, or the attitude of the community around you of this initiative?
It was quite amazing, really, because, well, first of all, I have to say my wife, who's been so supportive all through the years, she was answering many of the calls. I was at work during the day, and they published an article in the paper that we wanted to start a hospice, and so people started calling, offering their help. And so my wife was the first volunteer coordinator, and we had probably about 50 volunteers. As soon as we announced that we were starting the hospice, we wanted to help, either to help us raise funds or when we started the work to visit the patients. So it started in the community, and I remember going to speak. I mean, I'd never asked anyone for a penny in my life, so it was a very new experience for me to ask for money. I went to speak to a group of elderly ladies who had their kind of monthly meeting. And I just told the story, really, of my father and how we'd had support from the hospice. And by the end of this session, quite a few of them were in tears. I hadn't done it on purpose, but they were moved by the story. And I remember they gave me £50 at the end of the session and wished me success. But later on, two of those ladies who died and didn't have a family left their house to the hospice. And so you just never know, with charities and with fundraising, who you're going to meet and how people are going to respond. And I can only say that God has provided for us in an amazing way over the years, and so many people have joined our mission to make the hospice develop and grow. So it's been very heartwarming to be involved in this.
So Journey of Hope is the name of the organization, right? Of NGO, or not?
No, it's actually Hospices of Hope.
Hospices of Hope.
And the Journey of Hope is a leaflet that we had published, because it has been a journey from Kent in the UK, where I lived, to Romania, and then we went to Moldova, Serbia, Albania, Greece, and then to Ukraine. So it's been a journey across South and East Europe.
So in all these countries you have hospices?
Yeah. Or teams, mobile teams, yeah.
And in Britain, how many hospices you have now?
We only have it's the one hospice that I started, because every hospice is, you know, in a local community, and they're supported by that local community.
And the country you started with was Romania, correct?
Romania, yeah.
When you started, because in Ukraine it's as well exists, but at the same time does not fully exist, and there is the whole, you know, thing around it about the whole change of culture. When you started in Romania, what was the most difficult or the most striking or the most strange and unusual? What kind of challenges you had in Romania, or probably in other countries as well?
Yeah. We started in Romania, we held a conference, and we invited all kinds of the authorities, the local municipality, church leaders, different groups and medical people, and we had a conference. And I remember that we invited, or I think there were 70 people who accepted our invitation. On the night, 150 people turned up, and the hotel had to scramble around getting extra chairs. And there was clearly a very big interest, because everyone that we spoke to on that first evening had had an experience of a relative dying, and it hadn't been a good experience. So there was enormous interest from the beginning, but we actually faced a lot of opposition in the beginning, I think, because we were a foreign organisation, you know, and people were suspicious of what we wanted to do. So it took time to really build credibility. But I think the reason that we succeeded was because we found a very good team from the very beginning, particularly a doctor. And in fact, the doctor we have here in Svoj reminds me very much of the doctor in Romania, Zoya, yeah. Daniela, she has been the real champion of hospice. When I met her, she was just finishing her oncology registration, so she was a young doctor. And I recognised, I think, something very special about her, and I asked her to join the organisation, and that decision was really such a good one, because she's been the one that's really opened the doors in the health sector. And now we have a big organisation in Romania. We have 300 staff, 5 different locations, and I think we look after about 6,000 patients in a year. So, but the most encouraging thing is that we started the first hospice, but now it's gone all around Romania. So there are about 100 organisations now that provide palliative care. And that's mainly been through education. So we have an educational centre where we run courses for doctors, nurses, others who are involved. And that's how it's really spread.
When you, let's say, step into the hospice, let's say in eastern part of Europe, and you start talking to the teams, and you are not a medical doctor, but you are a person who organized the hospice. Yeah. What are the signs for you that it's something real? What are the signs for you that it's right when you see or feel what?
I mean, I would say that there have been so many milestones in developing palliative care, because you know, when we started, we just had one nurse who came from England, and she trained the first Romanian nurse. One doctor who, you know, it was just a very small team. And as we grew, and as people started to realise what effect good palliative care could have on a patient, lots of people started to take interest. So I think we realised that it was going to be a long journey. There would be many milestones. We had to change legislation because palliative care wasn't even known or recognised. So we had to get the government to pass a new law to recognise palliative care. We had to introduce legislation for patients to have access to morphine. We had to introduce legislation that allowed the government in Romania to give money to an NGO. So all of these things were, stepping stones. And now I feel in Romania it's very well accepted, and we've just had a big campaign really through finance through the World Bank to really spread the message about palliative care and make sure that it reaches the parts of Romania where it doesn't exist now.
What's the psychological trick about NGOs and government? Because in post-Soviet countries, it's a very unusual concept. On one hand, for example, Ukraine has very horizontal society where volunteers and NGO play a huge role.
Yeah.
But for the government to give money to NGOs, it's still, the concept is very strange. How did it work in Great Britain? Why government gives money to NGOs and how the whole thing works?
I think particularly in the health sector, it's been areas that were underserved or where there weren't really a lot of state services available. So this was, palliative care was one example, but services for mentally handicapped people, services for mental health. These were things that normal people, ordinary people wanted to see, and they were having problems maybe looking after their own relatives, and so they started organisations to try and make things better. I think through some of the pioneers in the hospice palliative care movement, for example, they lobbied the government realised there was a need to improve care for dying patients and their families, so they started to listen, and eventually they realised that it was a movement that couldn't be stopped and that they needed to support it. And it started with small amounts of money being given, but now, as I said, that in the UK, normally it's about 30 to 50% of the total costs of running the service.
Coming to the psychological part of the thing, for example, you as a person who started the hospice, do you still have, or did you ever have certain fears before you enter? So now you will enter the hospice and you will see people in a really difficult state and their families.
For me personally, no. I've always been comfortable visiting people in hospital. I'm having a blood test is easy for me. I've never really had a fear of hospitals. For some people it is difficult, but I say to people that, once you go through the door, you'll find it very different to what you expect. For example, a lot of people are very fearful about going to a children's hospice. It's very sad that, children have a severe disease and that they're going to end up dying before their time. But if you actually visit a children's hospice, you'll find it's a place filled with fun and laughter. The children sort of see illness in a very different way, and you soon then forget your fears and you're immediately drawn to the children. And I've seen many people go into a hospice and sit down with the children, forget where they are, and come out really inspired by the visit. So it can be difficult to cross that threshold, but I think once you do, you realise it's not such a gloomy place. It's a place where there's a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of compassion, and it should be like that.
When you are building or supporting building hospices in, I don't mean physical building of the stones, but just as initiating or establishing a hospice in some country in Eastern Europe, how would you explain people what is it consists of? What are the most important parts or most crucial parts in your pillars, in your view?
So we always start usually with a mobile service or home care, because most people want to be at home. And if you can keep someone at home, and it's where, you know, their family is, where their familiar surroundings are. So we have a lot of home care teams that go out to the home. So you'd have a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, maybe a chaplain, a physiotherapist, and they visit the home and they'll give the patient care as long as they possibly can. I think the next level is what we call day care. So we usually have in hospices day centres where people who are still mobile can come and they can meet with other patients who are going through similar things, and so that gives them a lot of support and encouragement when they can speak to others and feel part of a hospice family. Then we have the outpatient services where people can come to get advice, maybe see the doctor, get prescriptions for drugs. But for some people, you really do need a hospice with beds, because if they're on their own and they haven't got a family member to look after them, or if they're in severe pain and it's hard to, sometimes you need to observe a patient over a longer period of time to get the right drugs. And then often they go home again, but it's very, very helpful to have beds. And the other good thing about having a hospice with beds, it's very visible. It's part of the local community. People can see it and people can come there. And now, recently I went on a plane to Romania and the passenger next to me saw me reading something. She said, "Can I ask you something? Do you know something about hospice in Romania?" And we got into conversation. She said, "Oh, my father died in Brasov Hospice last year and they were wonderful." So it's really nice to get that feedback, you know, that when people actually know about the hospice and the care that is provided.
Interesting things are, for example, in where Zoya works, there are very interesting parts of her work. For example, there are people who would come there to have to make haircuts and hairdress for somebody, or manicure, or something really very unusual. In my understanding, this is as well an essential part of this care, right?
Yes, I mean, hospice is much more than just, you know, beds like a hospital. Especially if we have a day centre, then we usually have an area where people can have their hair done. A lot of women with breast cancer have something called lymphedema, and they can come for treatment for that. Sometimes, you know, just for relaxation, massage, that kind of thing. So it's a holistic kind of care that, you know, looks after the whole person. You don't just look at the person and see the disease. You look at the person as a whole. You know what is important for them. One thing that I really I went back to the hospice in my hometown recently, and the patient was making a book with stories about her life that she wanted to pass to her grandchildren, and the nurse was helping her to put pictures in the book and write things. And it's that kind of, you know, sort of holistic care that can really make the last days of a patient's life or last months meaningful and give them a good quality of life.
What is the role of psychologist in the whole thing?
I think illness is very complex. I mean, if you're diagnosed with something, it can be a real shock. It's hard to come to terms with. So a psychologist can really help you talk through that whole process. I think also when a patient dies, it's the family that's left behind, and the family can be quite traumatized, both through the illness and afterwards. And a psychologist can really help to make sure that patient works through their problems, or the family members work through their grief, and that can really save lots of problems later on. So psychologists are also an important part of the hospice team.
How do you see Ukraine now?
I'm so happy that I was able to make this visit, because both, you know, for the opening of Svoy's new clinic, but also it's so much more meaningful when you're up close. I mean, in my 2 nights of staying here, I've had to go down to the shelter when the air alert has sounded, and so I feel I understand what people are, a little bit more about what people are going through on a daily basis. You know, I'm very fortunate I can go back home tomorrow and sleep in a comfortable bed without sirens wailing all the night. So from that aspect, it's brought it closer to me. I think my most moving experience was going for a walk in the city yesterday and seeing the square with all the flags and the pictures of the soldiers. I mean, it's just horrendous what's happening, and well, I just salute the brave people of Ukraine for, you know, for their resilience and the fact that, you know, they're living here and working here and helping people here. And our little bit that we can do from the UK is just a drop in the ocean, but I hope it will help.
If I understand correctly, when you work with some country, it's as well quite holistic. So it's hospice as a hospital care, it's mobile, it's different initiatives to change the legislation, and you said that it's education center. Can you tell a little bit more about the education centers?
So, for example, at the moment, we're doing a 30-week course for nurses who are involved in caring for dying patients in Ukraine. So we're using experts from the UK, a professor of nursing who has huge experience in palliative care, and others as well. The head nurse from Romania has been involved, and they're delivering a lecture every week on a particular aspect of palliative care. So it might be how you communicate with patients, it might be wound care, it might be all sorts of other aspects of how to, you know, talk to relatives, how to, you know, approach the whole subject of death. So each week there's a different topic, and I think they found it really helpful. Everything is being recorded onto a platform, and so it will be made, when it's finished, made available for nurses across Ukraine. So hopefully it will be helpful for anyone really who's nursing a patient with a terminal illness to know a little bit better how to care for them.
Let's say 3 years passed by and we are still free, sovereign Ukraine, hopefully. Yeah. What would you like to see as the results of your work? What will be how it will look like in 3 years in terms of if you do everything which you plan to do?
Well, first of all, I think the education part is very important. So we want to be able to help provide more training courses for doctors, nurses and others, and because we have both the expertise in the UK and also the training centre in Romania, I feel that's a way we can really help. Obviously we can bring some of the nurses to our centres, and that's sometimes very helpful to exchange experience. So the education is very important. We decided that we would work with 2 small teams, one in Ivano-Frankivsk and one here in Kyiv with SFOI, to help them develop and grow, and hopefully have a model that can then be replicated in other parts of Ukraine. I think if you do something well and you grow the expertise and you see how it's working well, then it can be taken to other parts of Ukraine. We're also planning to do some more online courses for doctors, and we'd also like to create what we call a hub. So that's where if you have a specialist doctor or a specialist nurse who can be in the clinic in Kyiv, and they can reach out to doctors and nurses in more remote areas and guide them through how to care for a patient. So if you're a family doctor and you're trying to care for a patient, you know, in an area near the front line maybe, or a remote area outside of the big cities, and you have no practical hands-on experience of palliative care, then you can contact the doctor in the hub and get information, what drugs to prescribe, how to you know, control the pain, what to look for. Sometimes, there could be emergencies in palliative care. Somebody could start to become paralysed. What do you do about that? So it's really having a hub that people can contact. And then we want to extend that to patients, so that patients also, if they're unable to contact a doctor, they can actually contact a centre where they can get some help.
Philosophically speaking, or culturally speaking, what is it for you about? Is it about values, dignity, pain?
Very much
what
so.
What is about?
Very much
for
so.
you?
I mean, I think, good care at the end of life is really a human right. You come into the world, and normally, maternity services, look after you when you come into the world, and so you need service to look after you when you go out as well. And I think it has been declared, a human right to have care at the end of the life. You shouldn't need to die in pain. It's unnecessary, and therefore you should have that right to have that care. There's still a long way to go, but it's about, the values of dignity, about having compassion. I think in going back to Romania, one thing that really needed changing were attitudes towards patients. Doctors obviously, sometimes dismissed patients who they couldn't do any more for. And often people would hear the words, "I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do." Whereas in fact, there is a lot that you can do for a patient even when the cure is not possible. Then there's still a lot you can do to make life comfortable, make the quality of life as good as you possibly can do. And there are so many things that you can do towards that end.
What works when you are trying to shift this attitude of the doctors from there is nothing to be done anymore to let's care about you?
I mean, again, it's education. I think, it took a lot of time to explain what palliative care was, for doctors to accept that it was needed. And now in Romania, it's much more accepted. But there are still problems. I mean, even in the UK, sometimes communication is not good. It depends a lot as well on the person who's giving the news. There's two ways you can say it. You can say it very bluntly, in which case the patient can be torn apart, or you can find a way to say it very gently and very sensitively, and that will help the patient and the family to accept it in a much better way.
And the work you do is now supported by British donations.
Yeah. We have our head office in near where my hometown is, and we also have an office in Edinburgh in Scotland, where we also raise money there. And we have a little operation in New York as well. We have a sister charity there, and we have some very generous US donors as well. So we try to get donations from wherever we can. We have 20 charity shops. That's something very typical for the UK. Every big charity has charity shops where people donate all sorts of things. It can be clothing, furniture, antiques, all sorts of things, and we sell them, and that raises the money for our work. So it's very embedded into the community to raise funds. It's just trying to find where you can get money for Ukraine. But I find such support for Ukraine in the UK, and probably in the last few years, I mean, Romania, it's dwindled because Romania is not considered now a country that needs a lot of help. But Ukraine obviously does, and we've been very encouraged by the amount of support for Ukraine.
How do you support yourself? Where do you get inspiration?
Well, I have a wonderful family. I have 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and so they keep me occupied, and sometimes my wife travels with me, not so often now because of the grandchildren, but all of my children have supported the work in some ways. And actually my youngest daughter is now effectively my boss. She's the CEO of the charity. She got the job 2 years ago with very stiff competition. I was very proud of her because she's got a real passion. She lived in Romania for 2 years, and she knows really what it's like to suffer, having seen so many children and adults in Romania when she lived there. And now she's really passionate about taking the charity forward. So I do more on the development side. She runs the UK office, and she started raising a lot of funds herself now. So I have that. I have a faith, and I have church friends who also support me a lot. I enjoy playing tennis. I like music, and perhaps my biggest relaxation is my garden. I love growing plants and seeing them bloom, and so that helps me a lot too.
And probably the last question for this interview, how did you meet Svoi? Where did you find them? Because we all know them because we are Ukrainians, you know, and we are following them on Facebook, but how did you learn about them?
It's funny because actually I can't really tell you who told me about it first. I think it was Dr. Irina from St. Panteleimon Charity Fund in Ivano-Frankivsk, because I'd said to her we would need to find another charity organisation in Kyiv, and I'm pretty sure that she did a little bit of research and found Svoi, and she told me that it was a good organisation and I should reach out to them. And then, because our country manager Asia lives here in Kyiv, I asked her to go and visit them and connect with them to see if they would like to partner with us, and that's how it happened.
That's a very, very good choice. So thank you so much for all the support you and Great Britain provides to Ukraine
It's
right
a privilege.
now. Thank you very much for this interview as well.
Thank you.
Дякую всім, хто нас дивився.